Hey everybody, Justin here, and welcome to the first in what I hope to be maybe a bigger series. I don't know how many of these I'm gonna do. Like I said, depending on in some of my previous videos, depending on how much time I have, because I am a very busy guy. Of ranking the albums. So this is where I basically take a band that I like, and I rank some albums. Normally I'd be doing the studio albums, but there might be some cases where if a band has multiple live albums, I might rank those too. Um, but basically, I rank the albums from my least in this band's discography from my least favorite to my most favorite. And today we are taking on U.S. pop rock band Toto, my number one favorite band of all time. Um, for those of you that know this band, um, there's and are very big fans of them like I am. You know the band that I'm talking about and the caliber of musicianship that is in this band and the pedigree that they have. For those of you that don't know this band, you're probably going to be familiar with some of their biggest hits. The biggest one probably being Africa, because of a recent, like, I guess, resurgence of the song in the late 2010s when another band called Weezer ended up doing a cover of it. Um, that band I'm not a big fan of at all. But I digress. So I'll kind of dive in. I'll talk about a little bit of the history of the band as I'm going through each of these albums. But Toto is a band that formed in 1977. Actually, most of the guys had been friends even before this time and have gone to the same high school. Um, and had played in a couple of bands. I think one of them was called Rural Still Life. But I would say that's kind of where it started. But I think for me, the birth of Toto was Boz Scaggs' 1976 album Silk Degrees. And so after that, this band of studio musicians formed in 1977, recorded some demos for Columbia. Columbia ended up signing them. They put out their first album in 1978. Um, they put out four albums from 78 up until 82 when they lose their bass player and they fire their lead singer to a drug problem. I'm just going kind of on the surface, but there's places where you can read up, a little more on the history of the band. They bring in another singer in 1984. He lasts maybe one album, one tour. They bring in another singer for two more albums in 86 and 88. And unfortunately, drugs get the best of him, and he is let go at the end of the seventh one tour. 1990, they put out a greatest hits album with a singer that was kind of forced upon them by the record company. And he lasts the one compilation album and the tour, which, according to the guitarist Steve Lukather and probably a few other members of the band, was an absolute disaster with this guy. So they end up letting him go after that tour, and they continue on as a four-piece for the next couple of albums. 1992, they put an album out, and they lose legendary drummer Jeff Porcaro to I believe it was an allergic reaction to insecticide. I think that's what it was. It was a heart attack. They bring in a drummer named Simon Phillips, who does four more albums with them from 1995 up until 2006. The band breaks up in 2008. They reform in 2010 as kind of a benefit for their longtime bass player Mike Porcaro, who was then diagnosed with ALS, and he passes away in 2015, right before the release of their 14th album. They continue to tour with Keith Carlock for a little bit, and then they get Shannon Forrest on the drums because Simon Phillips leaves in 2014. They put out another a very good greatest hits package in 2018 called 40 Trips Around the Sun that has three new tracks. They put out one final album called Old is New, and we'll be talking about that one. And they end up splitting up again in 2019, 2020 due to a loss of a pretty good, pretty major lawsuit, which I won't get into. There's all kinds of information on that. They're now touring under the Toto name, but they're doing what they call the Dogs of Oz tour. Toto being the dog in The Wizard of Oz, hence the name, with Steve Lukather and Joseph Williams kind of at the helm, with a cast of amazing musicians on this particular tour. So anyway, that's a little bit of the history of the band, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as I go through these albums. I own all 15 albums except for 2 of them. So I'll do a little bit of show and tell on the ones that I do own as I get to them. So, like I said, I'm going to rank these studio albums. There's 15 of them, from my least favorite to my most favorite. So, starting in at number 15, I am going to go with 2002's. Let me see if I can bring this up here. I'm going to go with 2002's Through the Looking Glass. So, this is basically a 25th anniversary celebration album that they wanted to put out. It's a covers album. Now, I was on board with it back when it came out, like I usually am with most Toto albums. I would try to get, at least from, a particular point, I would say since this one came out, I would try to get the albums like on the day of release or, right around that time. I was on board with this because I knew most of the songs on this album. But I think once the follow-up album kind of came off, I rarely ever went back to this album. And I wish I still had a copy of it because it is very, very hard to find now. For a decent price. You probably can get it on Amazon for like $25 or $26, but a used CD of this is pretty big bucks. But it's a covers album. I'm not a big fan of bands putting out covers albums, and Toto got a little bit of backlash from the fan base because I guess they were hoping for an original album, an album of original material, and instead they put out a covers album. I will say, looking back on it, there are some of the tunes on here that really kind of stand out to me. Others, maybe not so much anymore, but this album's definitely kind of fallen off. I've fallen off the bandwagon with this album. Quite a bit, so I rarely go back to it. I would say the highlight songs on here would probably be their cover of While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which, to be honest with you, there's a couple of live versions out on a couple of their live albums that blow the studio version way out of the water. I think there's one on Live in Amsterdam, 25th anniversary live album, which I do have back there in my stack of albums that you can't see right now. The other one, I think, is probably their cover of Bodhisattva, Steely Dan classic. I think those two are very, very well done. And I would say maybe if I was going to pick another one, maybe their cover of Burn Down the Mission is pretty faithful to the Elton John album classic. I've always dug that song anyway. All right, so at the bottom of the barrel for me, Through the Looking Glass from 2002. All right. Coming in at number 14, I don't think this was a coincidence, but Toto 14 from 2015. I'm over here, by the way. I know this is I will say Toto is not really well known for their artwork, but I really dig this album cover quite a bit. Very, very cool. I love this album cover. All right, so Toto 14 comes about because they have an obligation for a studio album in their contract at the time with, I think this was Frontiers. I think they did the 35th anniversary Live in Poland DVD and live album. And then in their contract, they had another studio album. So that's how this came about. And I've read in interviews that Lukather just basically said, you know what, we're just going to throw everything into the pot and make the best album we possibly can. At this stage in the game, there's four members of the band. You have Joseph Williams on lead vocals, easily one of my favorite vocalists. You have Steve Lukather on guitars, and you have David Paich and Steve Porcaro on keyboards. Also on this album is the great Keith Carlock on drums, so he ends up replacing Simon Phillips and does, like, I think one very, very quick tour with them before he heads off to go play with Steely Dan again. But I think the songs on here are fantastic. Here's my issue with this album: the production. I find it very compressed. I find it very hard to listen to. I find it very harsh in the production. A little too modern. And unfortunately, I think this is an effect of the infamous loudness war. And for me, I think if this album were produced by maybe somebody else, C.J. Vanston ended up handling the production on this album. I don't know who mixed it, though. I don't think it was... I'm going to have to look here. Yeah, C.J. Vanston mixed it. Then Peter Dowell from Universal Mastering Studios mastered it. It's not my favorite production of the band. But I think Burn is an amazing song, especially the way the chorus just explodes from out of nowhere. I really like Chinatown, which has a throwback to, late 70s era Toto, where you've got a, very, very groove-oriented song. And the song was actually started back in 77, 78, and hadn't been finished until this album. Toto, ELO, and Eagles, yep. I agree on ELO and Eagles. I need to dive into more of ELO's catalog. I've got everything from the debut to Balance of Power. But anyway, continuing on Toto 14. Excuse me. Excuse me, I'm allergic to terrible mastering and production. Anyway, Sean Barnes, how are you doing? I think a hidden gem on this is the Steve Porcaro penned The Little Things. And also on the Japanese pressing of this album is a bonus track called Bend, which you can only find on YouTube. It's not available on any streaming platform, but that's another 100% Steve Porcaro tune. Also, the finale on the album proper, Great Expectations. Pretty much everything you'd ever want to hear in a Toto song. It's very proggy. It has hills and valleys as far as dynamics go. But again, I think this album really suffers from the production quality. So Toto 14 is number 14. Number 13, I am going to go with Toto 20. Now, there are two albums in this catalog that I'm ranking that are demos, previously unreleased stuff. That's why I'm including them. I'm including stuff that wasn't previously released, so like a compilation album. So some would call this a compilation album, but it's compilation of, some demos, some outtakes, things that didn't quite make the album. There's a couple of previously released songs, but they're live versions, and they're excellent live versions. So this has various outtakes, various songs, and some early 1977 demos on it. It kicks off with Going Home, which is, honestly, I think, should have been released on the Past to Present album. It would have been the return of Bobby Kimball after his firing after the Toto 4 tour because of some drug use. I think that's what it is. This would have been his return, but the record company said, no, we don't want to do this. We got a guy for you, and they bring in a guy named Jean-Michel Byron, which, like I said before, was a complete disaster. If you read Steve Lukather's book, he talks all about that, and there's many, many interviews all around the interwebs that talk about that disaster. Tale of a Man was from the Hydra sessions. That should have been on the Hydra album. That's a great tune. Last Night was from the Seventh One sessions. In a Word was released as the B-side to the single I'll Be Over You from another album we'll be talking about much, much later. That should have been on that album. Then you get to an original demo of Miss Sun, which was done by Boz Scaggs. But here you've got the original demo of that. You've got another demo in Love Is a Man's World. You also have On the Run, which was based around the E minor shuffle from an album called James Newton Howard and Friends, which had James Newton Howard, David Page, Steve Porcaro, and Jeff Porcaro on it. So the E minor shuffle was kind of the basis to a song called On the Run, which was later released on a live album called Live in Montreux, which I believe was leading up to the release of Kingdom of Desire, which we'll talk about. There's a great live version of Dave's Gone Skiing from another album we'll be talking about. And then you've got a fantastic live version of Africa. Now, there are a couple of things on this album that are not included in the 2018 re-release, which would be the all-in box set. You don't get On the Run and you don't get Dave's Gone Skiing, but I believe you get everything else, which is kind of a shame. So I think if you were going to investigate this album and possibly get a copy for yourself, try to find an original CD copy of this. So that is Toto 20. That is my number 13. My number 12 is Old as New. This follows kind of the formula of Toto 20, which has some newly recorded stuff and some basically some studio outtakes that they finished up in the studio. It has the 3 brand new songs that were released on the 40 Trips Around the Sun compilation. Some very, very good stuff on here. You have Alone, which kicks off the album, which honestly should be a bigger song than it is. You have Devil's Tower, which I think, I couldn't tell you when that was done, but it has, but it's got Jeff Porcaro. It's got a Jeff Porcaro drum track that they finished up, and a few of these songs have that. That one, Spanish Sea, has that. You have a couple of really nice Steve Porcaro pen tracks on here. Chase the Rain is a highlight for me on this particular album. If you can't tell, I'm a huge Steve Porcaro on here. There's a lot of Beatles influence on here, especially in Chelsea and Oh Why. If you listen to those 2 tracks, you'll hear that influence. And then you've got the mighty, mighty rocker that is Struck by Lightning. That's so good. Featuring, I think, Vinnie Colaiuta plays drums on that one. I'd have to double check. But the thing that keeps it near the bottom for me is the very last track on here, which is basically Toto featuring Skrillex and What's So Not, a song called We'll Keep On Running. If I was going to rank my top 10 Toto songs, that song wouldn't be anywhere near the top 10. That is my least favorite Toto song. I'm not a fan of much electronic dance music at all. Doesn't do anything for me. And for me, Skrillex and Toto just don't mix. That's just my opinion, though. So other than that minor setback, this is a good album. Like it quite a bit. All right, that was 13. Album number 12, Minefields from 1999. This is a music on vinyl reissue. Um, kind of a cool album cover. Rather interesting artwork. A little more interesting than, some of the stuff that's, been their artwork. Um, very, very good album. I would say, as far as production goes, this is a beautiful sounding album. Um, I will say, if this is an album you want to explore, avoid the 2018 reissue that's in the all-in box set because they forgot to add the master reverb and some of the other little touches on that. So stay far, far, far away from that. Unfortunately, it's on the streaming platforms. The version of Minefields that's on streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music is the 2018 reissue. If you can find a copy on CD from 1999, I highly advise that you go that direction. All right, so Minefields, the return of Bobby Kimball. So now Toto's back to a 5-piece, and they go for a very, very produced album, which is kind of their standard. You can definitely hear Steve Porcaro touches, but he's not in the band at this time. He's kind of a studio cat on most of Toto's later albums. It is a rather long album. I think it very nearly maxes out the length of a compact disc, which is about like 80 minutes. That's if you include the bonus track, Spanish Steps of Rome, which is available on some CDs, but not all of them. For example, this doesn't have it. I think I've got a Korean import of it over here in my CD collection that doesn't include it. If you want to get the full experience with that bonus track, I would either get the US issue or the Japanese import. Either one of those will have that. Now, the other interesting thing with this album is that there are different track listings on this, especially with the US version versus the Japanese version. Two very different orders of, different running orders of the songs on here. But I'll go through some highlights on here. I love the title track. There's some really cool soundscapey kind of stuff, happening in there. You also have the opener, After You've Gone. The song proper is really good. It's classic Toto, pop. However, the ending runs a little long, in my opinion. And to me, and that's kind of the case on a lot of these tunes. I think they could have, trimmed the fat a little bit as far as some of the endings on this album. But Melanie is a classic Steve Lukather ballad. One Road is really cool. Cruel has some really good, really nice groove to it. Some great horn arrangements. Caught in the Balance should have been a bigger hit. I think if this was released in like 88 or 89, it would have been a bigger album than what it was. There's the Prague. There's some Prague touches on here, especially in the very last track on this album, which is called Better World, and it's in 3 parts. Very, very proggy intro and outro on that. So, yeah, very good album. Like I said, it runs a little long. But if you can get past that, there's definitely some ear candy to be had here. So that is, I believe, number 12? Yeah, I think 12. Oh, that's 11. Sorry. I'm losing my, I don't know. I'm losing my, my count here. Give me 1 second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, that would be my number 11. All right. Yeah. That's what happens when when you're doing a live stream, you're ranking this. Number 11. All right. No, that was number 12, I think. Number 11, or the next one, Kingdom of Desire 92, the very last album that had Jeff Porcaro right before his passing. And I believe he passed right before this album came out. Um, Died of, like I said, I think it was a heart attack, and I think it was a pesticide reaction. But, so Toto are down to a four-piece after the firing of Jean-Michel Byron. And like I said, there's all kinds of interviews, all over the interwebs about that. Um, so the band is down to a four-piece of Steve Lukather, David Page, Mike Porcaro, and Jeff Porcaro. And this is a very, very heavy album. Um, you can definitely tell it's Lukather influenced, but at the same time, this is a group, effort. Um, Mixed by Bob Clearmountain. It's a great sounding album. Um, hey, Sean, how you doing? Sean Johnson. Um, but this is a barnstormer of an album. It kicks right off with Gypsy Train, which is a very hard rocker. It has, one of the many, many variations of the famous Jeff Porcaro shuffle on it. Jeff is all over this album as far as groove goes. So you have Gypsy Train, Don't Chain My Heart, Never Enough is really heavy. How Many Times is a really heavy rocker. Slow, a little bit on the, slower tempo side, but it still moves. You also have, you have ballad moments, which to me is, obligatory on any Toto album. So you have songs like Wings of Two Hearts, The Other Side, Only You. I think Only You was written for the Top Gun soundtrack, or it was written for a soundtrack at the time. At the time that it was written. You have the brooding, heavy Kingdom of Desire title track, and then you've got the very fusiony Jake to the Bone, which is I'd say one of my favorite Toto instrumentals. This particular copy has a bonus track, which is a live version of Little Wing. But yeah, so if you want to hear like the heavier side of Toto, this is definitely a go-to. All right, up next, I'm going to go to, if I can get the image up here, I'm going to go to 2006's Falling in Between. There we go. So Falling in Between was done in 2006. Now, a few things happen here. David Page leaves from the tour to, I think, take care of some family issues, and they bring in Greg Fillinganes, who is a very, I would say, a legendary studio cat, keyboard player, probably one of the best in the business. If they were going to get somebody to cover David Page's role in the band, I don't think they could have picked a better choice than Greg Fillinganes. So Greg steps up and does the tour. He permanently joins the band. And then they record this album as a six-piece. So you definitely hear Greg all over this album, but there's a ton of great keyboard work from both Page and Fillinganes, as well as some Steve Porcaro touches. So Steve helps out on this album quite a bit. It's all over the place for a Toto album. It's very progressive in spots. You could tell they were kind of just doing whatever they wanted to do on this particular record. But it opens with the title track, which is, hey, if we're gonna kick this album off, we're gonna kick it off heavy. It's structured interesting, where you've got verse 1 and chorus, verse 2 and chorus, and then that's it. You get an instrumental throughout the rest of that song. Dying on My Feet is great. That's got some James Pankow arranged horns. One of the guys from Chicago towards the end of that tune. Bottom of Your Soul should have been a big hit. Bottom of Your Soul features Joseph Williams. So remember, Bobby Kimball was still in the band when this came out. So you've got a track that features both Joseph and Bobby, which is really, really cool. You have King of the World, which is, you've got one of the trademarks of Toto is the shared lead vocals between various band members. So David Page sings on the verses, Steve Lukather sings on the pre-choruses, and Bobby Kimball sings the choruses. So very, very good arrangement. You have Hooked, which features Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull on part of the tune. You have the, I would say, almost Van Halen inspired Taint Your World. There's all kinds of cool stuff on this album. There's some great ear candy on here. Production sounds very, very good here. So there's that one. I've kind of lost track. 1, 2, 3. How many more do I have? I actually have 8 left. So 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that was my number 9. And if you're a Beatles fan, you'll get that reference. Number 9, number 9, number 9. Okay. Good. I'm back on track again with the count. This is what happens when you do one of these for the first time. All right. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Number 8 is Isolation from 1984. This is after Bobby Kimball is fired from the band, like I said, to some drug issues. And some other, I think some other stuff was happening too, but once again, don't quote me on that. They bring in a guy named Fergie Fredrickson from a band called Trillion, and then later I think he was in a band called LaRue. Later on, he did some work with David Hungate and Shannon Forrest in a band called Mecca. That's another AOR band I would highly check out. That band would probably, if I was going to describe that sound, it would be Toto meets Survivor. Jim Peterick had a big hand in writing a lot of that stuff on that album. I think those first 2 Mecca albums. But so 1984, here we get a bit of edge with a lot of these songs. So Carmen is starts off as a pretty good rock tune. Lion is amazing, another great rocker. Stranger in Town was the single off of this album. That should have been a huge hit in 1984 with a cool video to boot. You get Angel Don't Cry, another barnstorming rocker. You do have the obligatory Lukather ballad in How Does It Feel? An interesting little bit of ear candy near the end of the song. You might hear the string section play a little bit of the melody line to a later Toto song called Stop Loving You. Kind of interesting there. But yeah, definitely if you really want to hear some more, harder edge Toto, in addition to Kingdom of Desire and some of the stuff from Falling in Between, this is definitely worth a listen. Fergie sounds great on this album. I would say Holy Anna's another standout track for me. That's kind of got a cool David Page vocal on it, a cool vibe to it. All right, so that is my number 8. Number 7 is the third studio album called Turn Back. So this was 1981, and Toto wanted to do an arena rock album, and you can definitely tell they were going there by the production on this album. No major hit singles off of here, but I do have a promo single of Goodbye Eleanor that's in my stack of 7-inch singles back there. This has definitely got some more rockers on here, like Gift with a Golden Gun, English Eyes. English Eyes is probably one of my 2 favorite tracks on here. I also love Goodbye Eleanor. So good. But you've got another beautiful ballad in A Million Miles Away and If It's the Last Night. So those 2 are... I really like this album. To me, if you can get past the production of it, it really is an underrated album. If there's anything that I would check out from the 2018 reissues, which would be the all-in box set, check out the remixes and remasters from like the first 7 albums. Those have definitely been, improved quite a bit. You'll hear stuff that stands out more than what you would hear on the original pressings. All right, so Turn Back is number 6. for me. No, that number 7. Excuse me. Did it again. That's what happens when you do live. This is also a promo copy too. You can tell by the gold stamp here. Yep, great album. Um, and because this album did so poorly, um, basically the record company issued an ultimatum, like have a hit with your next album or we're gonna drop you. That album will be coming up later. Yeah, number 6. Yeah, Turnback was number 7. Number 6, I'm gonna put their second album, Hydra. So they were pretty successful with their debut album. You had a hit in Hold the Line. You had another hit in Georgie Porgy. You had some very good standout tracks on that album. But here, Toto started off by wanting to do a prog rock album, maybe a concept album, and you can hear that in the first 2 tracks, which is Hydra and St. George and the Dragon. You can definitely tell, like, kind of the setting that they wanted by the album cover. That, by the way, is Steve Porcaro on the cover. So you get some really cool keyboard work, and if we're talking keyboards, this would have been the debut of Steve Porcaro's Polyfusion modular synth that was featured on 99, which is the keyboard solo, which kind of has a French horn, brass kind of sound. That's kind of where you hear, the start of, the way he would craft his brass sounds. But all right, highlights for me on here, definitely the title track, very, very proggy. 99 was the hit off of this album. Believe it was inspired by a George Lucas movie called THX 1137, where all the characters had numbers instead of names. Don't quote me on that one. White Sister is an amazing rocker on this album, and there are countless live versions that cook really nicely too. And then you have, at the very, very tail end of the album, another Steve Porcaro track called The Secret Love, sung beautifully by Bobby Kimball, I believe. Yeah, this is definitely a highlight in their discography, and in my opinion, quite underrated. I would say any of the albums in what I would call the Big 7, which is their first 7 albums, any of the albums that kind of flew under the radar should be talked about a lot more. This one and Turn Back in Isolation, definitely should rank a little higher on people's catalogs. But all right, at number 5, I'm gonna go with 1995's Tamboo. So this would be the debut of Simon Phillips on drums. So there's still a 4-piece. However, you do have a featured vocalist in Jenny Douglas. Back in '95, she was known as Jenny Douglas McRae, who shares lead vocals on "Baby He's Your Man," "The Turning Point," and the bonus track "Black Eye," where she takes a solo lead vocal. Why is this ranked so high for me? The production on this album is perfect. This is the album that I use to tune a live sound system. And I know a couple other production companies that do as well. Just absolutely an amazing album. Amazing sounding album. So the highlights for me are definitely the opener, Gift of Faith. You've got quite a few ballad moments on here that honestly I think some stand out a little bit more than others to me. I will remember If You Belong to Me and The Other End of Time are like the 3 really good ballads. Just Can't Get to You is good. I think it's lacking maybe something that the other 3 have. You have Slipped Away, which is really cool. Time is the Enemy has got a cool shuffle groove to it. Drag Him to the Roof is great. You've got you also have The Road Goes On, which is really cool. And then you've got the very fusion-y Dave's Gone Skiing. I actually covered that tune with a friend of mine who's now playing on Broadway. Forget which show he's in, but he Facebook messaged me. This is like in 2017, I think, 2018, roughly around there. No, it would have been 2017. um, messages me and says, "Hey, I'm doing this thing at the Rochester, New Hampshire Performing Arts Center, and I want you to play. We're gonna cover Dave's Gone Skiing, and I want you to play." I'm like, anytime I get to play any Toto stuff, I'm in. So, um, there's a reason this is as much as I love this album, there's four other ones that I like even more than this. But because of the sonic quality, that's why this one ranks so high for me. All right, so Tambu is at number 5. Top 4. I'm gonna go with the debut at number 4. On some on other people's lists, this might rank a little higher because this was the start of the band. As much as I love this album, there are 3 others that I love even more. Um, it starts off with Child's Anthem, which is an amazing instrumental. Then right away you get pretty much everything that Toto is in one song, and I'll Supply the Love. It grooves, it rocks, it's got some really cool keyboard moments in here. There's a cool vamp at the end of the tune. Um, Very, very cool. And it's also got some great background vocals. Manuela Run is also really cool. You've got the gorgeous Bobby Kimball led You Are the Flower. Girl Goodbye is a barnstormer of a tune. There's some very good live versions of that tune out there. Um, I would say the highlight, at least for me, because I'm such a Steve Porcaro fan, is Taking It Back. That's got a very cool groove to it, and I just love I love all the keyboard stuff that's on that tune. You've got the classic that is Hold the Line. As great of a song that is, I'm kind of at a place where I don't really need to hear that one again. And then it closes with Angela, which starts off as a ballad but takes a surprising twist and turn near the bridge of the tune. So um, this is definitely there's definitely some good stuff on here. Um, Obviously, yes, you have Hold the Line and you have Georgie Porgy, but the rest of this album is just so good. Um, I would say all of these albums, other than maybe 2 of them, um, there probably wouldn't be anything that I would skip on them. Like I said, Through the Looking Glass and possibly the last track on Old Is New, I don't really go back to very, very much anymore. Um, Number 3, I'm going with Fahrenheit. Album number 6 in their discography. Oh, excuse me, I've been talking quite a bit. Here we are. Sweet, sweet caffeine. Can't have a Justin Have You live stream without a Coke. All right, Fahrenheit 1986, their 6th studio album, the first one with Joseph Williams. So Fergie Frederiksen last one album and one tour, started having vocal problems, started getting really nervous, so the band let him go, brought in Joseph Williams, who is the son of world famous film composer John Williams, who later on would sing on the Lion King soundtrack, on basically providing the singing voice of adult Simba on Hakuna Matata and the film version of Can You Feel the Love Tonight. But anyway, so this is where we first meet Joseph, and this pretty much has everything you'd want to hear in Toto, and to me, it's such an underrated album. You have I'll Be Over You, which was a monster, I wouldn't say the monster hit that, that Africa and Rosanna were, but it was a hit single. I still occasionally will hear it on like soft rock radio every now and again. But there's a little bit of everything on here. You have that tune, Without Your Love, and my favorite track on this album, Leah, which is another Steve Porcaro song. You have those ballad moments. You have kind of the pop moments in Till the End, Fahrenheit, and then Somewhere Tonight, I think. You also have, some rock moments in Can't Stand It Any Longer. We Can Make It Tonight and Could This Be Love. There's also an instrumental on here called Don't Stop Me Now, which features Miles Davis, which is the way the album closes. Very, very, very cool song. But like I said, in my opinion, this is such an underrated Toto album. Uh, Very, very good. Joseph Williams, like his vocals are on fire on this album. Um, so, like I said, very underrated album. So this is my number three. Somebody else's number three might be different. This is my number three. Down to the top two. I think if I show you my number two, you'll know what the number one is. Number two for me is the seventh one. This is the second album that I've ever heard from this band. We'll talk about the first one in a minute. But another amazing vocal performance from Joseph Williams on here. And again, this one has a very good variety of things that you'd expect from Toto. You have the pop side in Pamela and You Got Me. Should have been a Michael Jackson single, to be honest with you. I think if he would have recorded that song, that would have been a monster hit. Also Straight for the Heart. So those three have the pop moments. You also have a couple of ballads on here in Anna and 1,000 Years. You've got an unmistakable shuffle groove from Jeff Porcaro in a song called These Chains. You've got some rockers on here in Stay Away featuring Linda Ronstadt. Only the Children, which is absolutely amazing. And then the album closer, Home of the Brave, which they've done some very good live versions of that song too. I love that tune. My personal highlight is a song called Mushanga, which I would consider Africa Part 2. It's got an unmistakable Jeff Porcaro groove. It has those famous CS80 synth brass sounds that you would hear in Africa. It has that kind of vibe to it. It has an exploding chorus, which Toto is also known for. A very cool instrumental section featuring some steel drums from Andy Narell. And I've got a couple of his albums in my jazz catalog, so I definitely want to explore some more of that. This is such a good album. I love this album. Honestly, I think it should have sold more than it did, to be honest with you. So that's number two, leaving the very first album that I have ever heard from this band. I mean, I heard a couple of songs, but I've never heard a full album until this one. Number one for me is Toto 4. What can I say about this album that probably hasn't already been said about anybody else? By the way, this is a half-speed mastered version. It absolutely sounds beautiful. So here you have the album, you have the band at a do or die situation where the label comes to them and says, hey, if you don't have a hit with your next album, we're going to drop you. And boy, did they deliver in a big way. The album wins 6 Grammys, and it sells a ton. You have 2 monster hits in Rosanna and Africa. A little tidbit, Africa almost didn't make this album. And it also featured a use of using tape loops as well. And if you want more information on that, there's a ton of interviews around the interwebs about the creation of Africa. It was done with a tape loop. They wrapped the tape around a mic stand and they did all this percussion stuff. And then you'll hear it even when the chorus kicks in, Jeff will come in with another drum group on top of the loop anyway. But anyway, so it kicks off with Rosanna, which is timeless as far as I'm concerned. Has one of my favorite keyboard solos ever in any song. Just the way it's constructed, the sounds, and the production of it. It leads into a song called Make Believe, which should have been a bigger hit than it was. That is pop perfection. You have the beautiful I Won't Hold You Back, with some backing vocals from Timothy B. Schmidt and an orchestral arrangement from James Newton Howard, and a very simple but very powerful Steve Lukather guitar solo. That song right there is everything you would ever want in a Toto ballad. And then you've got Good For You, which is a cool kind of rockin' tune. It's a Feeling is another Steve Porcaro song. That's one of my favorites. Oh, Sean, when you get deeper into this catalog, I think your love for this band is going to grow even more. Um, side two kicks off with the rocker, with the Steve Lukather penned rocker, "Afraid of Love." I think he wrote that one. It was either him or Page. One of them wrote it. Let me check my. Let me check my. Yeah, Lukather, Page, and Jeff Porcaro wrote that tune. Lukather brings it, brings the lead vocal on that song. And then you've got "Lovers in the Night," which is really cool. I'll tell you what a cool song on this is. A song called "Waiting for Your Love." That's a song that could have easily been recorded by Michael Jackson, and it could have just exploded on the charts. Honestly, that would have been a perfect song for him. But that's got a very cool, unmistakable Jeff Porcaro groove on it. And then obviously there's the juggernaut that's Africa. But yep, so that right there is my number one. All right. I don't even think I'm going to try to count backwards on these because I guarantee I'm going to forget the order of them. But there you have it. There's my ranking of all 15 of Toto's studio albums. And if you haven't had the chance to dive deeper into their catalog, I highly recommend it. I will say, if all you know from Toto is Africa, you're missing a whole lot of extra really cool stuff. Or even, Africa and Rosanna. If all you know are those two songs, stop what you're doing and go listen to any of those top 8 albums I'd say any of the first 7, but definitely check out their later stuff, especially this one here. All right. So I hope that gives kind of an explanation as to why they're one of my favorite bands. Like everything that they've touched, other than one album and maybe one song, I've liked quite a bit and, even loved. All right. So there you have it. That's my ranking of Toto's studio albums. I think at some point I've got to revisit their live albums. They have quite a few. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think 7 or 8 of them. If I'm kind of counting in my head, but I don't own all of them. I probably own like 2, which means I need to, at some point when my finances allow, I need to fix that. All right. All right, I don't know what happened there. Um, I'm on a MacBook. That's why. And I'm using a trackpad, which is another big mistake, so I need to get a mouse. All right. So there is my ranking of the Toto albums, like I've said for the 3rd time. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Now for the obligatory, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you like any of the content that you've seen on my channel, whether it be a gear review, a studio hangout session, a talk like this. Definitely subscribe to my channel and click the notification icon. You'll be notified anytime I live stream or when I release a video. I don't have a set schedule because I am such a busy musician, outside of this. If you want to check out any of my music or possibly make some purchases and help support what I do, go over to my Bandcamp page, and I will put the link up to that right now, right on the bottom there. There we go. Try to line it up. There we go. Right down there. That's my Bandcamp link. All right. So there you have it, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.